Okay. All right. The question is, are you allowed to use an umbrella on Shabbat? Reef holds that making an ohel, a tent on Shabbat, is asur min Torah from the daat. It's an extension of building boneh, and the Rambam holds making a tent on Shabbat that's temporary is an isur de Rabbanan, even though it's mobile. Yeah, it's even though you can move it. Yeah. The Rambam says, listen to this halacha. Rambam says, asur lilbosh b'Shabbat koba sheshulav kashim v'rahabim tefach o yoter. You're not wearing a hat on Shabbat that the brim of the brim of the hat goes out a tefah, which is 8 centimeters, not that far, on each side. Because you're making a tent on Shabbat with your hat. If you have a hat, the brim goes out like this, you're making an ohel. Rambam says asur. Also, Shulchan Aruch in Siman 301, he says the same thing. Regarding the hat, the poskim talk about it, and if the brim of the hat is bendable, Mishnah Berurah talks about this. He has a lot of hitirim. If the brim of the hat is bendable, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a hat that comes out and it's very, very stiff. It's like hard, like a rock. It doesn't bend down. A hat like that could be a big problem if it's a cap only comes down on one side, so maybe it's not a complete ohel. And the cap bends also. Yeah, we're talking about something very, very stiff. Mishnah Berurah, on this Siman 301, we can do another time. He has a whole bunch of reasons why you're allowed to wear a black hat. He brings a few words in Yiddish. I don't know what they are. Different styles of hats that they had in Yiddish, and he has a bunch of hitirim. He says, maybe some of our hats, the brim goes at an angle. It's not straight like a roof. But if a guy would have a hat that's like comes out like this and it's hard and it's not meant to bend, it'd be an issue. Yeah, it could be a big issue. Okay. Explore that another time. I'm not giving a halacha about the hat right now. We're talking about umbrellas. So too for an umbrella, you cannot open the umbrella and use it on Shabbat. Even if the umbrella was already open before Shabbat, you're not making the ohel today. Once you put it over yourself, you're creating a tent from a tent that's already created. It's still an issue. That's at the end of the Sefer says of Rabbi David Pradno. And the Gaon, the Ba'al Noda Yehuda, he writes, Gam ken le'esor petihat mitriya b'Shabbat. He says also asur to open an umbrella on Shabbat because you're making an ohel aray. And he writes, Im haytat betuha me'erev Shabbat. If the umbrella was opened before Shabbat, says the Noda Yehuda, and maybe you can say if it was open before Shabbat, the ohel was already created, the tent was already created before Shabbat, that's not a problem. Ulam, however, and he says that, however, there are those who say that even if it was open before, if you put it on your head on Shabbat, you're making an ohel and it's asud. He says, even if it's not forbidden, if the umbrella was open before Shabbat, even though there's room to be lenient, yesh isud mishum mar'ita ayin. How is anybody supposed to know that you opened the umbrella yesterday and you didn't open it today? Someone's going to see you with an he'll think that you opened it on Shabbat. Even though, according to the Rambam, it's only rabbinic, we still have a chashash of manita ayin. We don't want to do manita ayin even for something that's rabbinic. Therefore, the Noda Yehuda says you should make it asud, and he writes the following words. When they introduced this umbrella to our country, a lot of guys started using this umbrella on Shabbat. Right away, I protested against the umbrella with all my strength. And I kept making speeches about it in the shul. I kept saying it's asur to use an umbrella. And I said, according to the reef, it's from the Torah, which is the isur of stoning, God forbid. It's not a joke. Once I started doing this in the shul every Shabbat, I started yelling about it. People started to listen and not use the umbrella adkan. The Noda Yehuda, I think Rabbi Lowy is the last name. I'm not sure which country he was in. Somewhere in Europe. In the Hatam Sofer, however, the Hatam Sofer is a very big, heavy hitter. The Hatam Sofer is more lenient with the umbrella. The Hatam Sofer writes the Halek ala Noda Yehuda. He disagrees with him, and he writes, "Shirov ha'olam b'medinato noagim la'akil la'aset ha'metriya b'Shabbat." Most people in the countries in Europe, wherever they were from, they used this umbrella on Shabbat. Why? It's a temporary building. It's going to go down in 1 second. And he says, I'll skip this part back to Yerushalayim, and he says that therefore it should be okay because it's only temporary. However, the Sefer Tehillah David writes that the Hatam Sofer is wrong. And he says, it's asur to use an umbrella. And someone who does this is breaking the halacha. So they argue in the Hatam Sofer. The Hatam Sofer is one heavy hitter who holds it's okay, but a lot of people argue. Rabbi Yosef Shaul Nitnezun writes in the Sefer Shoel Meshiv Tlita'a that it's also asud, and he argues also on the Hatam Sofer. Agreeing with this to be strict is the Minhat Haim and the Leshad Hashamin. He also disagrees with the Hatam Sofer. Rabbi Yosef Sevi Halevi, who is the Abetin in Tel Aviv, he writes in his Sefer Amina Na'ima to push away the Hatam Sofer and say you cannot use an umbrella. What about the Hida? The Hida writes in the Sefer Bekei Yosef, Shematza b'shut Gibeat Pinchas kitivat yad. He found a manuscript written from the Sefer Gibeat Pinchas from Rabbi Pinchas Anav. And he talks all about the whole subject. And he comes out, you're not allowed to open the umbrella whether on Shabbat or Yom Tov. But he found, the Hida says, I found in the manuscript where it says, if it was already open before Shabbat, you just want to use the umbrella that was already open. On Shabbat, you have a problem of carrying. If there's no eruv, you can't do it. But on Yom Tov, where there's no problem with carrying, you can do it. The Hida says he found this manuscript writing this. So according to this Hida, if you live in a city like we live in, then there's a eruv always for Shabbat, Shabbat, then you can be lenient if the umbrella was open before Shabbat. That's the Hida. That's what the Hida. Huh? He's not worried about my dying. No. And the Abal Hagaon Abi Mordechai Karmi writes in the Sefer Ma'amar Mordechai that you cannot go by this manuscript that the Hida found, and he holds it's asud. Also agreeing, another heavy hitter that says it's asud is the Ben Ish Hai. Yosef Haim from Baghdad, the Ben Ish Hai says you cannot use it as well. And the Mishnah B'Ura, the Chafetz Haim writes you cannot use an umbrella even if it was open. The Hayy Adam writes this, the Petach David writes this, the Oel Avraham, Hazon Ish, Kiryat Hana David, Shevet Levi, and it says, Hanhag as well. And so therefore, Chacham Ovadia says, Yesh makom le'arich od bazeh. I can write much more about this, and actually he does write much more about this in his Sefer Hazon Ovadia, in the 5th book. He has pages about the umbrella. He says, Ve'od Hazon Moed, I'll do it another time. And he ends the halacha, and he says, Asur leftoch mitriya v'lenoseh b'Shabbat. You cannot use an umbrella on Shabbat. Again, you can't open it. You cannot open it on Shabbat. Even if it was open from beforehand, you should, it's asur to still use it. For sure, if you live in a place where there's no eruv, because it's also a problem of carrying. The people who are warning others and the people who are being warned about this should have a lot of peace, like a flowing river. I'll just say two last things on this halacha. There's an interesting piece to this that maybe we'll address if I remember next Sukkot. What about on Simchat Torah when the kids get an aliyah? All the children come and we put the talit on the 4 poles and we're making oil on top of the kids. Is that allowed on Simchat Torah? Chacham Ovadia talks about this in Hazon Ovadia. It's the whole thing that we'll do next year, God willing. And the last piece also, I remember when I learned this sugya in Shabbat, I think page 137, Shabbat, about the ohel. You should know this also applies. The kids make these forts. The kids, like when we were little kids, we used to put the blankets over the chairs. It could be a big issue for the adults to participate in making the fort. Or maybe let the kids do it because you're making an ohel. But I remember learning the sugya, and as long as you break the ohel, I don't remember exactly the measurements because I learned it a couple of years ago, but as long as there's holes in the oil, it breaks the roof, it would be allowed. So I remember when I was learning the sugya on Shabbat, I said to myself, I want to create a Shabbat umbrella where every certain amount of tefahim or half tefah, I'm going to put a slit, a little hole, so the rain will drop down. And I already had an idea. Maybe I'll have it when the rain drops down, it'll catch into another piece of fabric that'll shoot it to the end, and a whole thing I wanted to invent. And then recently, a few months ago, I saw someone said they invented a Shabbat umbrella. My idea, you're never the first one to. I think someone else had the same idea. So I'm not sure. I think there's a Shabbat umbrella, maybe prototype. I don't know if it's invented, but if there's holes in the top, it might be a little bit better. But the bottom line is the normal umbrellas that we use, you do not open them on Shabbat, even in the house, even without rain. Don't open it. Forget the superstition. That's nonsense. But you don't want to open it because you're making an oil. And you don't want to close it if it was open because you might be breaking an oil. And even if it was open before Shabbat, we don't want to use the umbrellas on Shabbat. Okay? That's halacha for today. Have an amazing week. We'll catch you next time. Let me end this. Thank you for coming, UV.